A month from now, significant changes are coming to the North Pacific. You won't even recognize the wind pattern compared to where we've been for the past 3 years. I'm Mark Sponsler, and welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast for the week starting Sunday, March 19th.
Stormsurf, waves, weather, buoys, altimetry, snow, temperatures, El Nino, weather analysis, essential data for outdoor people, all the time, no hype.
Be sure and like and subscribe. Give us a thumbs up. Ring the bell. You get automatic notification when the videos are posted, typically on Sunday evenings. And also down below, there's a little box you can click to make a donation to Stormsurf. I'd like to thank those that have donated the past week. Elliot Harris, Ben Furby, Nilo, R. Kinnett, Peter Belden, Don Medraton, W.M. Clean Campbell, Bebop Movers, J.M. Tone 1, Nicholas Redford, and Lauren Madley. We really appreciate your contributions. As I said before last week, we're working on getting a new server for the buoys, and all your contributions are going towards that. So thanks a lot. We really appreciate it. And with that, let's get to work. As usual, we'll start by looking at significant wave heights for the North Pacific Ocean. And as usual, there's not a whole lot to look at. Pretty calm pattern off of California. A little bit of seas in the 8 to 10 foot range, maybe in the Gulf of Alaska, and some sort of a gale trying to get organized off of Japan, but it looks like it's bound for the Bering Sea. Let's get into the details. We'll do a quick roundup of current conditions, looking at the buoys, starting up in Northern California. Point Reyes buoy number 029. We're looking at all the energy that's currently hitting the buoy, anywhere from up to 33-second period, really long period energy, and the numbers in the blue here, that's the height of that energy in feet. So a tenth of a foot at 28.6 seconds. You get the idea. Really, and all the way down here to 5-second period, pure wind chop. We see a little bump here around the 8 or 9-second period range. Using some math, we calculated primary swell is 9.9 feet at 8.7 seconds from 159 degrees. Theoretically, that would come out to be surf at about 8.7 feet. It's not that big, or if it is, it's just a torn up, choppy mess. So nothing really to see there. Let's go south. Looking down in Santa Barbara, buoy number 46053, the East Santa Barbara buoy. Again, looking at all the energy hitting the buoy, and well, I've never really seen it that flat. There's literally nothing going on. Primary swell, 0.4 of a foot from 12 seconds. That's surf at about half a foot, and that's probably about what it is. Then down on the south end of Southern California, buoy 191, the Point Loma South buoy. Again, a little bit of tiny bits of energy and scattered between 16 and 10 seconds, something like that. Primary swell, 1.5 feet at 12.4 seconds from 190 degrees. And that's surf that it's just about 2 foot. And that's about what the surf looks like. And then finally out to Hawaii, all the nearshore buoys are down, so we're looking well off the coast. Buoy 5101, Northwest Hawaii number 2. There is a bit of energy, not much, but a little bit in the 10 to 12 second period range. Primary swell 4.2 feet, 11.3 seconds from 193 degrees. That puts surf at about 4.7 feet, and that's about what it is. There are waves, and it is rideable just barely. And that is the only place that we've seen that has any decent surf. Looking at significant wave heights, but going back in time to Wednesday, March 15th, just this area right here. So that's Hawaii, U.S. West Coast, Japan over there, and the equator way down here. Just watch the seas here. There's not even a quote-unquote gale. There's just some fetch that developed, and it started to build a swell front here as we got into Thursday, pushing south towards Hawaii. It dissolved. I mean, seas were only 8 to 10 feet. There's Hawaii. That's Saturday. And then we get into today, and you can see the line of the swell front just starting to hit Hawaii. It's hitting there now. Again, rideable surf. Nothing great, but it's better than flat. So let's look to the future. We're going to start looking at jet stream level winds. These winds up about 30,000 feet help support the formation of gales. When they form, help direct their track. We're looking for a trough, a dip in the jet, and we have one right here. Not much of one, but anyway, what that helps do, see the winds pushing south here, helps create a counterclockwise flow aloft and down at the ocean surface. That is the hallmark of low pressure. And of course, low pressure, if it's strong enough, generates winds. Winds, if they're strong enough, get purchase on the ocean surface and generate seas. Seas, as they radiate away from the wind or that fetch area, eventually turn into swell, and swell, when hits your beach, turns into surf. Right, so we have a bit of a trough trying to organize Sunday here in the northern Gulf. The jet actually is pushing off Japan. It splits. This is what we've had mainly. This southern branch here has been dominant. You can see it pushing into California. They're semi-calling this an atmospheric river, but it's doesn't have a whole lot of moisture with it. I think we got maybe 2/3 of an inch of rain so far today in Northern California. And some of that's heading to Southern California. But the jet's basically split. Typically in between a split flow like this, like in here, you get high pressure, and that does really nothing for making decent surf production. But when you get a trough like this, especially when it connects with the southern branch, you notice the winds pick up here, and that can help support gale formation. As we move into Monday, that trough continues with winds building, pushing into Northern California at about 150, maybe even 160 knots. And then we get this kind of a backdoor trough dragging cold air with it from Canada and pushing down the coast. This is the standard kind of pattern that we've had here. It's got a bit of a tropical connection, though, due to the southern branch picking up warm, moist air from further south in the Pacific Ocean. So perhaps some snow generation from that, or rain potential. And that trough sweeping down over Southern California as we get into Thursday, the 23rd of March. And then that's kind of the end of that. The jet now fully split. Most energy in the northern branch, running up into the Bering Sea on Friday the 24th and falling down. Maybe potential for another little backdoor trough here as we get into Saturday, falling south. But looking at the longer-term models, this is about as far south as it makes it. Maybe it can create some swell and some fetch here, but probably not a whole lot of precipitation into California. Going down to the surface now, surface level pressure, surface level winds. We're looking for some sort of low pressure to develop here because we know there's a trough here. We see some sort of a low riding north along the jet stream. That's on Sunday. So we get into Monday. Here we go. Here's the beginnings of low pressure building off of, we'll say, the Pacific Northwest. 30 to 35 knot winds aimed at central and southern California down into Baja, with the core of the low moving onshore. It looks like somewhere around later Tuesday into Wednesday, something like that, and then a bunch of north wind behind that. Another low forecast developing here in the northern Gulf of Alaska with 30 to 35 knot winds, maybe generating some seas, high pressure behind that. I mean, we're looking, and here we go as we get into later Friday. This is new, another little trough forecast developing. We know there's a trough in there that's going to make some low pressure with 35 to 40, almost 45 knot winds out of the north. And continuing into next Sunday. We'll see if that happens. That could potentially generate some surf as well. But overall, a pretty lacking in energy pattern over the North Pacific. Significant wave height forecast. Of course, we're here to talk about surfing. We need seas, preferably 30 feet or greater somewhere in the Pacific. That would be in the purples. We see a momentary bit of that pushing over the North Dateline region this evening, but all landlocked then after that by the Aleutian Islands. So really no swell potential from that. We do have our little low that's forecast as we get Monday into Tuesday with 23.5 foot seas. These are the highest seas over this entire domain and their actual location, and the max winds over this whole area too, 43 knots, but that's, where is that? 33 north. Oh, that's right here, sure enough. and 130 west. So maybe some production of surf, but it looks like it's probably going to be pretty junky and more than likely just wind swell when it hits the California coast. Another low up in the Gulf of Alaska as we get in Wednesday into Thursday with 26 to almost 28 foot seas, and that one fades out. And then this new low that just showed up on the charts on Saturday, falling south, generating 27 foot seas, building to almost, well, just about 28 or so foot seas. Whoops. So we'll see if that really develops. It's only been on the charts for not even a day now. So don't have a lot of confidence in the model a week out, hardly even 4 days out. Local wind forecast for Hawaii and California. Well, Hawaii right now in this steady, like light south wind pattern. Okay, for the North Shore. South Shore has just been kind of this, not really choppy, but just lumpy, kind of ugly mess. California, hard south winds right now. It's fully white capped, at least in north and parts of central California. As we get into Monday, winds turn northwest, California, north of Point Conception, about 10, maybe 15 knots, continuing the south wind pattern for Hawaii. Tuesday, the storm or the gale starts building off the coast. South winds at 20 knots for central and North California, even into Southern California. And that south wind pattern continues for Hawaii. As we get into Wednesday, winds turn northwest at 20 to 25 knots for California. South wind pattern continues for Hawaii. Thursday, northwest winds, still pretty much of a mess, 15 to 20 knots. South wind pattern, cutoff low developing just northwest of the islands. That'll probably build the south flow even more. So we get into Friday, high pressure, 1038 millibar high, winds circulate clockwise around the high, just likely producing wind swell and chop down most of exposed California. The trades try to get into Hawaii. It's probably not till Saturday. Yes, a southeast flow for Hawaii at 15 knots. Strong northwest winds for California, pretty much a mess. And on Sunday, low pressure theoretically off the coast. That'll cut the legs out of the high. Maybe winds will start dying, and trades for the Hawaiian Islands finally pull into the islands. Surf spot forecast for Half Moon Bay, Northern California. I mean, generally small. Theoretically, what is this, 11-foot surf somewhere here in the Wednesday time frame. But looking at it, it's pure wind swell, 9 feet at 12 seconds. So that's the swell from the gale off the coast. And then it continues. And this is interesting. In this chart, it drops off. But what the chart really does is when it's just pure junky wind swell, it doesn't even count it as swell. You can see here half a foot at 12 seconds, but we know it's bigger than that. It's probably just a steady downward trend here from there. And then we get into next weekend. It looks like some more wind swell in the 4 to 5 feet at 13 seconds. Okay, that isn't even wind swell. That's real swell, theoretically, from that Gulf up in the off of the Pacific Northwest. We'll see whether that really develops. Doing the same thing for Santa Barbara. Yeah, wind swell again midweek. Same deal from the low off the coast. Swell up to 9 feet at maybe 11 seconds, something like that. But then after that, things get really quiet. And then for San Diego, I don't believe this at all. 12-foot surf, not likely. But still, wind swell. Some fraction of that wind swell. I think the way this goes is the models are more picking up off seas outside of the Channel Islands really than inside the Channel Islands. So you can pretty much reduce this by half or more. But that would be the only shot for any real swell. Otherwise, it's really small. And then for Oahu, building wind swell out of the north. We saw that coming from that fetch that was falling south from the Aleutians. That wind swell continues Monday into Tuesday and slowly dropping down. Swell height 7 feet at 10 seconds at its peak and then slowly fading off from there. And you can also see, here's the wind direction, that south winds, and then slowly south, slowly turning to trades at the end of the forecast period about a week out. Precipitation forecast, mainly for California. You can see it here. Moisture, California, San Francisco right there, Point Conception there. San Diego down here. The white is snow, the blue is rain. You can see rain over the state today, continuing into about Monday morning or something like that, fading out. Then the low starts winding up off the coast, and more rain for the entire state. Snow for the Sierra, making it up to Tahoe theoretically on Tuesday night, and then slowly fading as we get into early Thursday. And then we know there's another low coming down from the north. You can see it here on Saturday. The question is, how far will it even form, and how far south will it make it? Well, we'll see. But right now, it's just a phantom on the models. Snow forecast dashboard for Olympic Valley. Theoretically, over the next 10 days, 38 inches. Kirkwood at about 39 inches. And Mammoth at about 22 inches. Since these storms are falling down from the north to the south, you know, most of it gets wrung out in the Tahoe area, and there's much less precipitation further south. And looking at the freeze level for the Tahoe Basin, all right, the red is liquid precipitation, the gray is sleet, the white is snow, and the blue is much drier snow. This is for Olympic Valley. The dark line here is the base of Olympic Valley. The summit up at the top of Granite Chief and Palisades at about 9,000 feet, the blue line there. You can see the sleet line below the summit, and for the most part, slowly falling temperatures. The freeze level at about 5,300 feet right now, slowly working its way down to about 4,000 feet or maybe even 3,500 feet, and then maybe a bit of a warm up out about a week from now, but then temperatures falling back down. So no sign temperature-wise of spring yet. All right, let's go take a look long-term. What's going on with the MJO, the Madden Julian Oscillation, and the ENSO, El Nino Southern Oscillation. These are the two major long-term determiners of weather across the Pacific Ocean. We'll start with the MJO, the Madden Julian Oscillation. It is this periodic weather oscillation that travels around the planet. There's two phases, the active phase and the inactive phase. The active phase is on one side of the planet, the inactive phase on the other. They rotate west to east around the planet, one on one side of the planet, the other on the other, and they go around the planet on the equator. What we are looking for is signs of the active phase of the MJO. The active phase is like a low pressure system. The inactive phase is like a high pressure system. When this active low pressure system starts moving over the West Pacific, what it does is it starts sucking up warm, moist air in the West Pacific, pushing it high up into the atmosphere. That gets caught by the jet stream. That energizes the jet stream, and a more energetic jet stream then will start digging out troughs, and troughs, of course, form low pressure systems, and that generates wind and storm and surf and all that. Also, the active phase of the MJO, when it's in the far West Pacific, it can dampen trade winds or out-and-out reverse trade winds. And that's really good, because what that'll do is take warm water that's in the far West Pacific that's been pushed there by steady trade winds and start pushing it to the east towards Ecuador. But it doesn't traverse the equator on the surface. It's underneath the equator, down about 150 meters or 450 to 500 feet. If you get a Kelvin wave driven by a strong enough active phase of the MJO, it takes about 3 months to make the journey from the West Pacific to the East Pacific. Now, the active phase of the MJO itself will typically traverse the Pacific in about 4 weeks, maybe 5 weeks, something like that. But if it's strong enough, it'll create that Kelvin wave, and the Kelvin wave lags behind by months. But eventually that warm water pool will impact Ecuador, and the Galapagos Islands start gurgling up to the surface and create a warm water slick there. if you get successive active phases of the MJO, they can create successive Kelvin waves, and what that does is start really building up the warm water pool off of Ecuador, which is normally quite cold. There's a lot of upwelling there. Trades are strong, but if the trades crash and you get upwelling, then that helps usher in El Nino, and that's exactly what's happening right now. All right, so we're looking for signs of the active phase of the MJO. So we'll start by looking, and remember, the active phase of the MJO dampens trade winds. So we're looking at data from the TAO buoy array, a series of buoys strung across the equator used for monitoring El Nino, but they also have wind sensors on them. This is the East Pacific here, West Pacific here, that's Ecuador, that's the equator, date line right there. We're just looking at the length of the arrows and their direction. Well, wind's blowing out of the east, but look at this there, and it's just 5 degrees north and south of the equator. That's where all the magic happens. So light east trades in the East Pacific, moderate trades in the Central Pacific, and moderate trades in the West Pacific, not particularly looking like the active phase of the MJO is in control. Now, it's not the actual winds, though. It's the anomalies, the difference from normal for this time of year. So the winds are light east, but the anomalies are non-existent, dead neutral. So this is pretty much neutral winds in the East Pacific. In the Central Pacific, well, winds are blowing pretty strong out of the east, but according to this, that's pretty much normal too. And then in the West Pacific, well, they're stronger than normal, so this looks like the inactive phase of the MJO is in control. If the strong active phase were in control, these arrows would be blowing from the opposite direction, from west to east. Looking at the wind anomaly pattern for the past 5 days. All right, let's look here. South America, Central America, Hawaii's up there somewhere. New Guinea there, the equator right there, the date line there. The all-important part here is what we call the Kelvin wave generation area. From right about here, the south of the Philippines, north of New Guinea, out to about the date line, and 5 degrees north and south of that. If you see westerly anomalies, see these oranges and all the arrows are pointing to the east, that's westerly anomalies, but it's only on the equator that it really matters. So we see westerly anomalies off of Ecuador here in the Galapagos, so that's maybe the active phase of the MJO. We see a flow up here, but I think that's more related to the jet stream. Maybe lighter than normal westerly winds. This was on the March 13th, the 14th, the 15th. Still, the westerly wind pattern appears to really be confined to the East Pacific, and then even that has been fading as we get into the 17th of March. So not a clear sign of the active phase of the MJO in the Pacific. Let's go look at the 1-week forecast. Here's the zonal wind anomaly forecast for the entire planet, all right? The oranges and reds are westerly anomalies. That'd be the active phase of the MJO, and you can go from the 17th of February here. You can see westerly anomalies working their way across the image here, okay? And then here's where the forecast begins. Now, this is the whole planet. The date line runs right up the middle. Far West Pacific starts about 125 east, so right about there. And then Ecuador is at about 80 west, so right about there. So you can see it looks like the active phase of the MJO was traversing the Pacific in February into early March. And as of today, it's pretty much out of the Pacific and now heading somewhere in the Atlantic. And you see easterly anomalies associated with the inactive phase of the MJO starting to build over the Kelvin wave generation area, and then forecast to be making it to about the date line about a week from now. So active phase was in control. Looks like the inactive phase is coming, but it doesn't look like a particularly strong active phase, in fact, or inactive phase. In fact, this active phase here looks like it was stronger than this inactive phase is going to be, and that is key. The difference between La Nina and El Nino in the Pacific is La Nina is dominated by the inactive phase of the MJO over the Pacific, where El Nino is dominated by the active phase of the MJO. And the active phase is what we want in the Pacific. We're feeding energy into the jet stream, creating Kelvin waves and bringing precipitation into California. And it's pretty apparent from what the weather has been doing since somewhere around Christmas that a major change is already starting to show up, even though El Nino, quote unquote, is not actually in control or even serious signs of it yet. It's just starting to get organized, but already it's affecting our weather. That's pretty impressive. All right, so let's look out 2 weeks. We're looking for, again, signs of the active or active phase of the MJO. We're looking at outgoing long wave radiation. A cloud cover is really what it is. If you see these oranges and reds, that's more sunlight bouncing off the ocean's surface, being reflected away from the planet. That's cloud-free skies. That would typically be associated with high pressure. So one could say the inactive phase of the MJO. The blues are the active phase of the MJO. More cloud cover. And let's get ourselves oriented here. South America, Central America, Hawaii, New Guinea there. The date line right there, the equator right there, Kelvin wave generation area right here. So today, it looks like the inactive phase of the MJO is setting up and the active phase is getting pushed out somewhere over the Atlantic. Going out 5 days from now, more inactive phase, it just continues. And then 15 days from now, about 2 weeks from now, it looks like it's per the statistic model, forecasts start fading on the dateline with the active phase starting to build over the maritime continent, pushing into the West Pacific. Now, the dynamic model paints a little bit better picture in that the inactive phase is gone 2 weeks from now, and a weak active phase starts setting up in the West Pacific. So the dynamic model is what I want to see happen. Next up, phase diagrams. It's the same two models, just a different way of looking at the active phase of the MJO. Statistic model here, dynamic model here. The heavy dot is where the active phase is right now. And let's figure out how to read this chart. The active phase typically starts developing, we'll say, in the Indian Ocean here, or even in the far Western Indian Ocean, phase 1 here. And then it moves to the Indian Ocean, over the maritime continent, that's like Bali, to the West Pacific, to the East Pacific, under the United States, across the Atlantic, and then back to the Indian Ocean. So according to this, the heavy dot is where the active phase is. The further that dot is away from the circle, the stronger it is. So a moderate active phase. Now this is where it's been, and look at this, incredibly strong, I mean almost off the chart, strong active phase of the MJO was in the far East Pacific, pushing into Ecuador on the 10th, the 11th, the 12th of March. And that was when we were getting our atmospheric river and all the rain pushing into California and the Sierra. So when the active phase is due south of you on the equator, either south or north, well, wherever the active phase is, either north or south of that point is where all the weather is, and typically both. All right. The forecast has the active phase, according to the statistic model, moving to the far western maritime continent and pretty weak 2 weeks from now. Now, here's where things get interesting. The dynamic model has the active phase crashing in the Indian Ocean and making headway back, just bypassing the maritime continent and most of the Indian Ocean and heading back towards the West Pacific. That's exactly what you'd expect to see during a developing El Nino situation, because the Indian Ocean gets choked with high pressure and parts of the maritime continent do as well, and the active phase just sits here in the Pacific, in the West and the East Pacific, and doing this sort of thing would be a classic sign of a developing El Nino. So again, we're hoping for this. We'll see whether it happens. It's 2 weeks out. Kind of hard to believe a model that far out, but at least it's a step in the right direction. Upper level model, all right? Showing propensity for precipitation. The green, wet, the orange, dry. South America there, Central America there, equator right there, dateline roughly there, there's New Guinea. Oranges, so this is upper level, so it runs about a week ahead of what's actually happening down at the surface. Things move fast in the jet stream, and then the surface kind of drags along behind. So this is showing the inactive phase already over the Pacific today and working its way out and through Ecuador by the 3rd of April, about 2 weeks from now, with the active phase pushing into the West Pacific about the very end of March, March 29th, and then making its way across the Pacific into about the end of April, April 23rd, and then the inactive phase of the MJO again pushes through. But this is interesting. The active phase actually looks stronger and probably lingering longer over the Pacific than the inactive phase. Again, another potential sign of El Nino. All right, the 1 month forecast from the CFS model. Again, whole planet on one chart. This is the east-west component of the wind. And just to let you know, so the MJO affects winds and clouds and precipitation, right? So there's multiple dimensions of the MJO. So each of these charts is sort of picking one of those things and looking at it. But the MJO, like the active phase, it reverses trade winds. That's the westerly anomalies. It creates precipitation, and it tends to be cloudier and wetter. All right, so whole planet on one chart. The date line runs right up the middle here. Far West Pacific, about 125 east, so right there. Far West Pacific, about 80 west. I'm sorry, East Pacific, far about 80 west, so right there. The dotted contours are the inactive phase of the MJO. The solid contour is the active phase of the MJO. Notice, the reds are westerly anomalies. Those are part of the active phase of the MJO. Notice this inactive phase, and there's your strong easterly anomalies. All right, so here's our big active phase of the MJO that traversed the Pacific right as forecast and is pretty much out of the Pacific as we speak now. Maybe a last little lingering bit of westerly anomalies off of Ecuador for a day or two, and that's it. And here comes the dotted contour and the easterly anomalies associated with the inactive phase of the MJO. Here's today's date right now. It's supposed to be working its way across. Well, it says straight line there with a little bit of westerly anomalies, but then lingering inactive phase until about April 15th, something like that. But you can see westerly anomalies trying to get established even while the inactive phase of the MJO is in control. Westerly anomalies by the end, a month from now, filling half of the Kelvin wave generation area. So if I haven't said or been clear about this before, active phases are great for surf production. Typically, now we're in kind of a hybrid mode right now because we got La Nina base state going on, but it's getting hammered by these active phases of the MJO. We are not in El Nino now. We're sort of trying to get to neutral, but the La Nina base state's still in control. That's why this active phase of the MJO, yes, it's made weather and rain, but it didn't do anything surf-wise for us, which is a bit of a head-scratcher because I was forecasting that by the end of February, something like that, we get a pulse and an uptick in storm and swell activity. Well, we got half of it. We got the weather and we got the snow, so if you like to ski or board, well, you were covered there, but if you were only surfing, then things haven't been as good as what we had hoped for, and I apologize for that, but this is, as you can tell, more art than science sometimes. Anyway, so inactive phase setting up, active phase, or even with the inactive phase, westerly anomalies taking root. This hasn't happened in years. That's a good sign. And then finally, the 3-month CFS model. The forecast is up here. What has been happening in the past is here. It's real obvious that some major change is going on. You just look, here's the date line, 180, right up the chart. Now, this is the past, November 2022. Here's today's date. Here's the forecast. Blues, easterly, and this is the east-west component of the wind. Blues, easterly anomalies up to about February 15th. And then, boom, here was our active phase of the MJO and associated westerly anomalies that traverse the Pacific. And notice, and for 3 years, all it was blues over the Pacific, easterly anomalies. Now we get our little inactive phase, but look at what the models are suggesting. This is what I was alluding to in the teaser at the front of the video. Major change. I mean, again, this is a model, but if even half of this sets up as forecast, these are incredibly strong westerly anomalies. That would be talking about building a Kelvin wave and transporting warm water from the West Pacific to the east. This is exactly the sort of pattern you would expect to do that sort of thing. Now, this is actually stronger than what the model said yesterday, and I don't believe that this is really going to happen, but maybe some flavor of it will. This model has done an actually amazingly good job of forecasting the coming of El Nino, doing it months before many of the other models, so far so good. All right, so let's overlay the MJO here. All right, solid contours, active phase of the MJO, and here is our current one fading out in the Pacific. Here, the dotted contour is our current inactive phase of the MJO traversing the Pacific. Now notice this, easterly anomalies, here's the peak of the inactive phase, and easterly anomalies are to hold in the Pacific right up to the peak. Then the day after the peak, we get past the peak, westerly anomalies start building in. And then as soon as the inactive phase is gone, westerly anomalies start building stronger. Even during this little inactive phase, then you have these are very strong westerly anomalies, and you just get the sense that some major shift in the atmosphere is going on. So let's go take a look at that. The low pass filter. And this shows you the general tendency towards lower high pressure anywhere on the planet. But we're really interested in the Pacific, and what we really want is low pressure in the Pacific, or the tendency towards low pressure, because now this affects not only the northern hemisphere, also the southern hemisphere. So this is our key for our summer surf production. Right, so we're going to start with the bad part first. The dotted contour is the high pressure bias, the La Nina signal that's been over the dateline. And notice, even today, it's starting to really recede quickly from the dateline region, from the Kelvin wave generation area. And as we get into April, well, it's almost, well, California is at 125, something like that. So it's sitting over California, and it's June. Imagine what it's going to be like in October. This will all be gone. And here comes the massively strong low pressure bias today, making it, I don't know, about halfway across the Kelvin wave generation area, halfway to the dateline, and just raging, pushing hard, and then setting up right over the dateline, or about 175 east, as we get into April and May. Really, the next big point I'm looking for is somewhere around April 20th, April 18th, something like that. That's when this big westerly wind burst is going to start, and that's what they literally call them, westerly wind bursts. It's when the active phase of the MJO sets up over the West Pacific, and not only does it produce westerly anomalies, but it produces very strong westerly anomalies, and that's what produces real Kelvin waves. I mean, like the kind that kick off major El Ninos, and this looks, at least at this moment, like exactly the kind of situation you'd want to kick off a strong El Nino. All right, so enough of that. What's going on in the ocean? There's multiple components to all this of an El Nino. It's not only the MJO and the surface winds, it's water movement. I mean, a lot of it is about the change in where warm water is in the Pacific. Typically, under normal trades, it's over in the far West Pacific. But when you get these westerly anomalies and you get Kelvin waves, the water starts moving east across the equator up off of Ecuador, and you start getting a warm tongue of water building up off of Ecuador. All right, so we're going to start by looking at the TAO buoy array, series of these buoys strung across the equator. These X's right here, these are the anchor lines on the buoys. And there are sensors. The X's themselves are actually sensors on those anchor lines. They read data, and then you fill in the gaps with a model. You get a profile of where the warm and cold water is in the Pacific. We have the 29-degree isotherm right here, that dark little red. Wish this sector was open so we could really see what was going on, but I guess some of the buoys over here are down. But that's about where it's been. The 28-degree isotherm is about steady where it was last week at about 178 east. The 26-degree isotherm, which for months was cut off at 150, it just went up here and that was it. It was all cold water over here, typical La Nina signal. Now you see 26-degree temperatures, that's centigrade, pushing the whole way into Ecuador, and the 24-degree isotherm all the way into Ecuador. And you even have 27-degree temperatures building on the surface here, meaning either one, that the winds are incredibly light here and the sun's starting to bake the ocean surface, or two, there's already been a Kelvin wave that's erupted here, and this is the residuals from that. And I think it's a little bit of both going on. But it's not the actual temperatures that matter, it's the anomalies, difference from normal for this time of year. And we are in a great pattern here. I mean, it's so nice to be able to report something good instead of doom and gloom for the past 3 years. But you can see it. 4-degree anomalies, positive anomalies, warm water in the West Pacific, draining in due to continued active phases of the MJO in the far West Pacific, scraping warm water that's been over the maritime continent and stuck in all the islands there, starting to dribble out into the Pacific Ocean. And then the active phases of the MJO take this water, start sweeping it east, and Ecuador is like right off here. So we see the remnants of the first Kelvin wave here off of Ecuador, 1 degree above normal, 4-degree temperatures in the West Pacific, the leading edge of Kelvin wave number 2 at about, what is that, about 150 west, and we think there is yet a third Kelvin wave building from the last active phase of the MJO that's fading over the Pacific right now. So this Kelvin wave was generated, 3 months ago, from the active phase of the MJO that gave us all the rain and snow back in around Christmas time. Here's the leading edge of another Kelvin wave that was, I don't even remember what, it was a month and a half ago or something, and then yet more building behind that. Here's another version of the same data. You can see piles of warm water. So this is Kelvin wave number 1 sitting here, leading edge of Kelvin wave number 2 here, and all this stuff back here, even down into here, we think is the beginning of Kelvin wave number 3. When you get successive active phases of the MJO and successive Kelvin waves in flight, that helps kick off El Nino. Well, what we already have here is Kelvin waves overlaying on top of one another, superimposed on top of each other. And I mean, I can't even quite tell where one begins and another ends. It's only because I try to track this every day. But that's exactly what you want. It's basically a river of warm water moving. The entire Pacific Ocean on the equator is reorganizing its balance of heat. And all this is being driven by the active phases of the MJO. You might ask, why do you spend so much time concerned with the MJO? And this is exactly why, because when it starts doing its magic, then the ocean starts changing. Once the ocean starts changing, you get warm water building up here, then the atmosphere changes in kind to it, and then the jet stream goes nuts, and then the magic happens. Sea level anomalies, just another way of looking at temperature down in the ocean, but without having to have buoys and sensors. What we're looking for is subtle changes in the height of the sphere of the ocean, all right, in the Pacific. You take a satellite, it rotates polar orbit around the planet, beaming down radar, and it can detect centimeter differences in the height of the ocean. That is, take out the waves, the wind waves, even the tides. If you account for that, and they've got the computers and the math to do all that, and if the ocean is a little bit higher or a little bit lower, that infers things about what's going on deep in the ocean. Cold water contracts, right? And so if it contracts, it's going to leave a divot on the ocean surface. Likewise, warm water expands, so it's going to create a bump on the ocean surface. I can't imagine who it was that figured this out, because it's on massive scales, but it works really, really well. So, all right, let's get ourselves oriented here. Chile, Peru, Ecuador, the Galapagos right there, Central America, Hawaii there. There's the date line, there's the equator. All these oranges and reds, positive anomalies, piles of warm water all pooled up here. Now, it used to be cut off like right here and only over in this, basically at New Guinea and past there. But because of the active phases of the MJO and westerly anomalies, look at this. At depth, you can see warm water. Well, it makes it to there. Well, really, there's a pocket there. There's one there. There's one there. And it's also radiating north and south, meaning if you have a Kelvin wave, it's just on the equator and it pushes like this. When it hits here, then it spreads north and south. And that's exactly what this is looking like. Now, might be wrong, but it seems like it's the start of that bulldozer pattern of warm water moving off to the east. Kelvin wave number 1, Kelvin wave number 2, Kelvin wave number 3 somewhere embedded in there, and the river is coming. And yet one more chart. Now, remember, this is all subsurface. This isn't on the surface. This is down 150 meters in the ocean. This is time here going back a year. This is the East Pacific here. This is the West Pacific. Blues are colder than normal temperatures. Here's your La Nina signal. Yeah, we did get a Kelvin wave back during La Nina in June of last year, but it didn't do much. There wasn't anything to follow it, and we just had this massive upwelling response. But then in November, December, we got a weak little Kelvin wave. So let's say Thanksgiving, the active phase of the MJO, and it took till, well, it made it into the Ecuador somewhere around February, so that's almost 3 months. Here is another active phase, the January, December active phase, and the Kelvin wave from that making its way across the Pacific. Now we have another active phase in flight. You can see it coming, and it's just starting to get like a machine. That's exactly what you'd expect in a solid building El Nino. Now we go look on the surface, and honestly, this chart is pretty amazing. This is sea surface temperature anomalies, the difference from normal for this time of year. And even if you're getting a start of a major El Nino, and we did this in, I think it was 97, 98 was the last really big one. There was another one in 2014, 2015, but in either one of those, yes, you could see the active phase of the MJO happening. You saw the westerly anomalies, but there wasn't a buildup of warm water, as I recall, as early as March off of Ecuador. You can see it right here. There's the Galapagos. Here's Ecuador. Here's Peru, Chile, Central America. And this is the classic warm water tongue. Now, these images are kind of don't overlay correctly, but this is high-res data, so we're going for that. You can see warm water building the whole way out to about, well, the leading edge of it, somewhere here about 140 west, almost south of Hawaii. This is a pretty impressive, very early season signal for the development of El Nino. Now, what's even better is all this area down in here, even 3 weeks ago, was full of cold water. It's all gone. This is all neutral temperatures. You can barely pick it out, but the white is dead neutral here, this area, which has been cold for years. It was cold even before La Nina got going. And the last of the little La Nina cold temperatures are just lingering here from a point from about, I'll say 140 out and beyond. We'll take another look at another picture here in a second. Sea surface temperature anomalies for the past 7 days. Just what's the trend been? Warming, steady warming over this entire area here. This is the classic El Nino kind of region. If it were going to start warming, this is it. And so I figure this is a mix of not only Kelvin wave activity, but just reduced trade winds. And so more sunlight getting able to beat down on the ocean surface and warm it up. So actually yesterday, this tongue going out here was a lot more pronounced. I mean, this is pretty variable data. It changes very much from day to day, but it's been consistently warm now since November. No surprise where we're going. And then finally, the overview. Now here is the classic El Nino developing tongue. This will get a lot warmer and a lot bigger, and it'll probably fill the whole way out to here as we get into fall. I mean, it's actually, what's impressive is that it's this well developed in March. We've still got 9 months to go before this thing peaks out. Now, it would not be unusual to have something happen in this El Nino development thing kind of falters or something, because that happened in 2014, 2015. We got all the right signs. It looked like we were off to the races, and then somewhere in the middle of the summer, everything just kind of stalled, and El Nino kind of halfway got organized, and then it came in strong the year after that. So we'll see how this plays out. I don't want to start yelling fire in a movie theater, but right now, this is a good, solid, early El Nino signal, especially considering it's only March. Sea surface temperatures in the Nino 1.2 region, that's the area right there by Ecuador and the Galapagos. Temperatures up considerably today. There we go. 1.44 degrees above normal. The cutoff or neutral is half a degree above to half a degree below. Well, down here we are in La Nina territory. Look at this. We blew through that back in January, kind of had a little setback, and now we're off to the races again. But that is not the official El Nino monitoring region. The Nino 3.4 area is, and that's the area on the equator south of California out to about the dateline, 5 degrees north and south of the equator. Now you can see, again, the cutoff for neutral is half a degree below to half a degree above. We've been hovering. We were well below La Nina. This is the classic La Nina sign, but notice the steady upward trend. We got into neutral territory back, what was that, about February 26, something like that. We haven't got to 0 degrees. We were so close the other day. We were like, 5/100ths of a degree off, or 5,000ths of a degree off and being neutral. Now we're heading down a little bit, but really there is no concern that we're not going anywhere but up from here. There's too much momentum in the atmosphere and too much water already moving around to think that we're going in any other direction. So we've talked about the MJO, which is it's really the atmospheric. It's sort of the thing that kicks things off. Then we've talked about what's going on down in the ocean. Then we've talked about the surface of the ocean. Finally, what does the atmosphere think is going on over the greater Pacific Basin? The MJO is kind of a West Pacific thing. I mean, that sort of nudges the door open, but then once the door is open, the whole Pacific and really the circulation over the entire planet has to change. But we're going to just start with the Pacific. So we look at the difference in pressure between Tahiti, which is in the Pacific, and Darwin, which is over the Indian Ocean. When pressure is lower over Tahiti, the index goes negative. Today's value, minus 7.66. Hey, that's pretty good. And look at this. It's been negative for 9 days. And where was it before that? Well, it was sort of pinging around 0. But then somewhere before March, well, for the most part, we were more positive than negative. Now it seems like we're heading more negative than positive. Now, why are we going negative here? Well, the active phase of the MJO has been pushing across the Pacific. We know now that the inactive phase is coming, so we expect to see these numbers start going back up into positive territory. But if the pattern is that we have more active phases of the MJO, then that over time will drive the average of these numbers down at least to 0 and preferably quite negative. The 30-day average is a way to take some of the noise out of all this. The value today, minus 0.08. We're like dead neutral. I don't remember the last time we were neutral. Where were we a month ago? Plus 13.87. So things are moving in the right direction. The 90-day average, which is the El Nino, so this is the MJO indicator. This sort of indicates we went from positive, which would be the inactive phase of the MJO, to the active phase. The 90-day average, I look at it as like the El Nino La Nina indicator. When it starts going down, that tells you that you're in El Nino. Now, today we're at, 10.83. Where were we a month ago? 14.4. So we're not really in any sort of an El Nino sort of thing. But there's also a 90-day average. So it takes 90 days for this number to reflect what happened. Well, this number reflects what happened 90 days ago, not what's happening right now. Here's the now. Here's 30 days previous. This is 90-day previous. But you see the trend is heading down. In fact, let's go look at a graph. Here's the 30-day moving SOI graphed out, okay? The downward spikes are the active phase of the MJO. The upward spikes are the active phase of the MJO. But when you have more inactive phases than active phases, well, your trend goes up and you go into La Nina. Now look at this. Look at this, just massive drop. This is using a little bit different data. What we just saw was right at 0. This is not quite caught up to that yet, but close enough. You see the double active phase of the MJO. And we expect, though, this will start creeping up with the inactive phase pulling in, but then another active phase behind that, and it'll drop us deeper. To get you into El Nino, Well, there's plus 10, there's 0. -5 isn't even hardly showing on the chart. We need to be down at like -15. Just like the active phase, when it peaked out, was at +20. Well, the inactive or La Nina, when it peaked out, was like +20. El Nino will peak out somewhere around -15 or -20. So we have a long ways to go atmospherically. All the fundamentals, the foundation for El Nino is building, but it hasn't manifested itself in the atmosphere yet. The atmosphere is starting to sense that something's going on. Hey, look at this. Look, if you're up in the atmosphere looking down, oh my, the ocean temperatures are getting warmer. Wow, there's Kelvin waves moving around. Wow, so over in the far West Pacific, there's these MJO things, and they're going on. And little bit at a time, I mean, the atmosphere is a big boat. It takes a long time to turn. But if all this active phase Kelvin wave thing just keeps happening and happening, it's going to turn. And once it turns, it's going to take it a very long time to turn back. So it's probably going to be a multi-year sort of event. And finally, sea surface temperature anomaly projections for the Nino 3.4 region, the official El Nino monitoring region, by the CFS version 2 model. All right, so where are we? We're middle of March, something like that. Temperatures right at dead zero, neutral. The forecast, you've seen this before, but actually the latest runs of the model have increased temperatures yet even more. As we get into July, temperatures about 3/4 of a degree above normal. As we get into October, temperatures 1.3 degrees above normal and knocking on the 1.5 degree temperature above normal as we get into December. That is certainly an El Nino. And this is the more conservative one. This is the PDF corrected. If we go look at just the raw data, it has temperatures up to 1.75 degrees above normal. Now, if I recall correctly, during the last big El Nino, we had some temperatures that were up for a single month as high as 2 degrees above normal. So this is not quite super El Nino status, but that will be something that we're going to be watching for. Just given everything we're seeing right now, it suggests that this is not just a normal El Nino, especially that we've been in La Nina for almost 3 years. The pendulum has swung cold. It seems like it's swinging to warm with gusto and much energy and much momentum, and wouldn't be surprised if we see temperatures up into the 2-degree range, but that's just me speculating, and it's way early in the game. Now, there are a whole bunch of other El Nino models that are running, El Nino, La Nina models. That should be updated this coming week. We'll discuss that and dive into that next week. But this model has tended to be better and more accurate and forecast this change better than any of the other 30 different models that are out there. So we're putting a lot of stock in this model as of right now because it has a good track record. So let's bring it all in closer to home. Surf-wise, well, the Pacific's still pretty locked down with the La Nina atmospheric pressure pattern still in control. Yes, the MJO and hints of El Nino are coming in the form of precipitation. More rain for California, and more is expected. Not a lot, not some super drencher, and more snow. That's all a good thing. I think our snowpack is in pretty good shape. I think our reservoirs are in good shape, and we're moving out of the drought rather quickly. That said, aquifer still needs to be replenished. The more rain we get, the better. I think that would be a good thing. But immediately, surf-wise, really not a whole lot. Basically, wind swell. We're waiting for some major gale to happen, but given that we're practically in spring now, I'd say that probably isn't going to happen. Wouldn't put it out of the realm of possibility, but we're not betting on it at this point. It's almost just take whatever you can get, try to keep yourself in shape for the summer, and we'll see how that plays out. Now, longer term, clearly, El Nino looks like it's developing. The early signals are just unbelievably strong this week. That's really encouraging, kind of a little bit worrisome as we get into next winter, but that's 9 months away and a lot can change. Remember, there are false starts, El Nino, and all that kind of stuff. But right now, the long-term outlook looking incredibly good for surf and snow and water as we get into next fall. One would expect that early next fall, let's talk hurricanes real quick. Just as that warm water starts building up off of Ecuador, well, more evaporation will fuel hurricane development as the La Nina jet stream and shear starts getting tamped down. Hurricane development, especially as we get into the later July, August time frame, should probably be pretty energetic and interesting to watch for the eastern Pacific, western equatorial Pacific. Also, as we get into fall, El Nino typically takes hurricanes that form there. They typically track north up off of Japan, and then with the El Nino enhanced jet stream, it'll take those storms, recurve them back to the east, and they'll get into the Gulf of Alaska and start blowing up. You can have major El Nino enhanced storms in the Gulf of Alaska as early as late August, early September. So that's something we're going to be watching for as well. All right, but otherwise, for now, well, just make the best of whatever surf you can get and keep our fingers crossed for the future. Again, if you want to donate on the Super Thanks, we appreciate it. We're working to get a new server. Be sure and like and subscribe. Ring the bell so you can get automatic notifications when we post the videos. And we expect next Sunday the video will be posted on time. So thanks for watching. Thanks for donating. We really appreciate if you have comments or questions, write them up down below and we'll be sure and answer them. We try to get to them as quick as possible. So thanks again for all your support, and we'll do this again next week, same time, same channel. Thanks for watching.